4 women go missing. 2 more women escape an abduction attempt. The missing women's cases go cold. The police are stumped. And then a body is found that changes everything. This is the curious case of the Lust Killer.
Hi YouTube, it's Josh and Miles and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be covering another true crime case for my Curious Case series. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, you can find the links in the description. This episode is the first solved case, so this video is formatted slightly different from the others. I'm still experimenting with different editing styles and writing styles to see what works best, so please bear with me. This video won't have as many visuals as the last video just because I'm not here to get copyright striked. The only clips I can find are from proper documentaries, so I'll be sure to leave links to those in the description. I'd just like to point out that this video is not being made to cause disrespect or anything like that. It's just being made to spread awareness about this case by compiling information from various different public sources on the internet. Now, with all that being said, let's delve right into the case. The day is April 21st, 1969, a sunny Monday afternoon in the city of Portland, Oregon. Sharon Wood, a 24-year-old married woman, leaves her secretarial job in the city to go meet with her estranged husband. The topic of discussion, a divorce. She walked into the basement level of the car park garage at her workplace and began to look for her car when she suddenly has the overwhelming feeling that something is behind her. Out of fear, she begins to walk to the level above where she can hear people talking. Suddenly, she feels a tap on her shoulder. Sharon turns around to a tall, pudgy man holding a pistol. The man tells her not to scream, however it's too late. The encounter both frightens and enrages Sharon, and in that split second she decides to fight. Sharon screams and pulls away from him, but he grabs her and puts her in a headlock. The man is much taller than Sharon and outweighs her by nearly 100 pounds. She realizes that if she doesn't act now, she would surely die. Her instincts are telling her that this man wants to murder her. Sharon kicks him with her high-heeled shoes and screams as loud as she possibly can. She reaches for the gun, grabs it, and gives a hard twist to try to dislodge it from the man's hand, but to no avail. The man puts his hand over her mouth to try to silence her, and in retaliation, Sharon bites down. Hard. In fact, she actually bit so hard that his hand began to bleed. The man tries to free his hand from Sharon's bite, but he can't. He struggles free and grabs Sharon's hair and tries to force her to the floor. However, he underestimated Sharon's strength. Sharon is not going to let him assault her. The man manages to overpower Sharon and slams her head on the concrete. The force of the impact stuns Sharon, relaxing her jaw, allowing the man to free himself from her bite. She hears a car coming down the ramp and, startled, the man picks up his gun and flees the scene. This is the last thing Sharon remembers. Somebody notified the police during the brutal attack, and Sharon quickly found herself sat in front of the police, giving a shaky statement. Sharon told the police that the man that had attacked her had been tall, with blue eyes and freckles. She claimed that if she ever saw him again, she would be able to recognize him. However, when police went to question other people in the area, nobody recalls having seen a man that matched the description Shari had given. The police leads came to a brick wall, and the case went quickly cold. 1 year earlier, in 1968, a 19-year-old girl called Linda Slauson was working for a book company, going door-to-door selling encyclopedias to families. She had been working the job so that she was able to pay her rent and save up money for college. Linda was on her last call of the night and knocked upon the door of a house in a neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. Nobody ever saw or heard from Linda Slauson again. She had simply vanished. In fact, the book company where she worked had zero record of where she had actually been that day, so when the inevitable frantic reports to the police from Linda's family came in, they were stumped. They had no leads whatsoever. Over the next few days, police actually found Linda's car abandoned, with apparently nothing missing from it. Linda had seemingly vanished into thin air. The police only knew one thing. If Linda had been abducted, whoever took her had been very careful. They left no signs of their presence, intentions, a struggle, or even what happened to Linda. A few weeks later, Linda Slauson's case went cold. Later that year, on November 26, 1968, Another young woman named Jan Whitney disappeared on the way home for the Thanksgiving holiday. She was only 23 years old. Her car, a Rambler, was found on the hard shoulder of a highway near Albany, Oregon. The car had been locked from the outside and there were no signs of Jan or a struggle that could have taken place. Mechanics that looked at the car determined that there was a minor mechanical failure that might have caused her car to break down. It's speculated that she then attempted to get a lift from a passerby. Please bear in mind that these were the days where girls could freely and easily hitchhike and nobody thought it to be dangerous. There were no more leads in the case, and just like Linda, Jan had simply vanished. It was only 4 months until the next incident occurred on March 27th, 1969. Just a month before Sharon's attempted abduction, Karen Sprinker, a 19-year-old girl, was home from college and was headed downtown to a local restaurant to meet her mother for lunch. Karen never showed up, and her mother immediately started to panic. According to her mother, Karen would never have missed or skipped lunch with her. In fact, police quickly discovered that Karen had parked her car at the car park for the restaurant where her mother was waiting. The car, just like the others, was left like the owner had intended to return. There were no signs of a struggle or Karen at all. Shoppers in the surrounding area claimed to have seen a very tall and strange-looking woman nearby. One witness even claims that when this person got closer to them, they realized it was actually a man in drag. The witness described the man in drag to have been fairly creepy, so naturally they avoided him. Police had no reason to link this man in drag with Karen's disappearance, so like the others, the case went cold. It was only 4 weeks until the next disappearance. Just one day after Sharon Wood's attempted kidnapping, a 15-year-old girl named Gloria Jean Smith was also a victim of an attempted abduction. However, she managed to escape without injury. The next day, Linda Saley, another young girl at just 22 years old, was shopping in the mall for a gift for her boyfriend. She was set to meet him later that night for dinner, however she failed to show up. And just like with Karen, this was very, very out of character. Like the others, her car was found abandoned with no signs of a struggle or Linda. The police's only lead was that the boyfriend was involved. However, after an investigation, it was quickly found that he had a strong alibi, and further, no reason to indicate his involvement. The police, at this point, had hit a brick wall. They were unsure of whether there was a connection between all these girls. They created extensive timelines for all the victims, noting that the girls had actually all disappeared in the second half of each month. They also knew that all the victims were young, white females, but that was it. Bear in mind that they didn't have CCTV in the areas where the girls had vanished. CCTV was not all that common in those days. DNA sampling techniques were also in the very, very early stages, so forensics could only take what the technology they had allowed them to, which wasn't very much at all. They had no other leads, and all of the cases started to go very, very cold. That was when, 3 weeks after Linda Saley's disappearance, a fisherman discovered the decomposing remains of a human floating in the Long Tom River south of Corvallis, Oregon. The fishermen who spotted the body bobbing in the river immediately rang for the police, and they arrived quickly. Once they arrived, the police found out that the body was that of a female, which had been bound to a car transmission box and thrown into the river. Now, a car transmission box is a very heavy object, about 115 kilograms or 250 pounds. So the police had a very difficult time trying to pull it from the river. But it told the police that this body was put there on purpose, and that whatever had happened to this girl had been purposeful, a murder. Also, the car transmission could be used as evidence that could be linked to any suspects later on in the case. The victim had been carefully tied with nylon rope to the transmission box with a very specific kind of knot. The police were sure to carefully cut the rope as to preserve the knot, as just like the transmission box itself, it could serve as evidence in court later on, or could be used as probable cause for a warrant. Most interestingly about this discovery is that copper wire had been used alongside the nylon rope to tie the body to the transmission. The ends of the copper wire had been twisted in a specific fashion that indicated that whoever was involved had a background as an electrician. Because the body had been found in water, it decomposed quite significantly, so the medical examiner had a very hard time trying to determine the cause of death. However, after hours and hours of examination, he came to the conclusion that the woman had died by strangulation. The medical examiner also discovered that there was an odd pair of post-mortem punctures, each circled by a burn, on opposite sides of the rib cage that seemed to have been caused by a hot needle or hot wire being pushed into the side of the woman after she had died. The police and the medical examiner had no idea what to make of such a puncture. The medical examiner next compared the victim's teeth to dental records, and it was determined that the victim was in fact the remains of Linda Sarli, the woman who had vanished just 3 weeks prior. Investigators quickly ordered a full search along the river, and sadly, a few days after Linda Sarli's remains were found, another body was discovered. This body had been bound to an engine head with similar knots and bindings as the previous body discovered. This was a clear indication that police were looking at the same offender for both offences. The victim had also been strangled, and the medical examiner was able to determine that the victim had been strangled with a strap. The clothing on the body matched that of which Karen Sprinker's mother had described her wearing the day of her disappearance. However, now this is where the case starts to turn a bit more gruesome. When the authorities lifted her body from the water, they found that she was also wearing a long line black bra that was far too big to have been hers, a fact later confirmed by Karen's mother. The bra had actually been padded with brown paper towels. Upon the removal of the brown paper towels, the medical examiner discovered that Karen's breasts had both been removed, and the padding put there to absorb the blood and fluids caused by the removal. The police continued to search along the river, hoping that they may find something linking to the other 2 missing women, but they found nothing more. At this point, all the police knew was that the perpetrator was either a very strong male or 2 men working together, because the bodies bound with all those weights would have been very heavy and difficult to carry. The police, due to Karen Sprinker's student background, decided to start questioning students on the Oregon State University campus in Corvallis, a move that would prove to be a breakthrough in this case. From interviewing several students at the Oregon State University, detectives quickly learned that some female students had been complaining about receiving creepy calls from a man who was trying to lure them out from their flats, presumably to go to the bars with him. There was also a bunch of reports of a strange, suspicious red-haired man who was somewhat podgy loitering around campus. In fact, one young woman had actually decided to go on a brief date with a man that claimed to be a lonely Vietnam veteran looking for company. The girl told detectives that she had no intentions of seeing the man again after finding him to be quite unnerving. Apparently, the man had wanted to discuss the discovery of bodies in the river quite intently. He even actually asked the girl why she wasn't afraid that he might strangle her. Her description of the man also eerily matched the description given by women who'd escaped abduction. This news set off alarm bells in the detective minds, so they asked the woman to contact the man and set up another date. So she did, and to her surprise, he accepted. The police and the students went to the designated meeting place and spotted a tall, podgy man enter. Upon approaching him, the police learned his name to be Jerry Brudos. However, while they believed him to be a very viable suspect, he acted completely at ease, as if he had nothing to hide. Detectives noted that this meant he was either innocent or clever, arrogant, and had no remorse whatsoever for what he might be doing. The police had nothing on Jerry to detain him, but they kept him under surveillance. Through surveillance, they learned where he lived, and more importantly, they actually learned that he was an electrician. Within 5 days of their first encounter with Jerry Brudos, police had enough evidence to arrest him with probable cause. Okay, so let's delve a little bit into the history of the police's current prime suspect, Jeremy Henry Brudos. Jeremy, nicknamed Jerry, was born on January 31st, 1939 in South Dakota. During his early childhood, his parents had travelled and moved quite a bit until they finally settled in Oregon. According to several sources, Jerry's mother had not wanted him after she'd already had 2 boys, and treated him with criticism and disdain from the offset. Apparently she wanted a girl. Whether Jerry realised this or not is unknown, but if he did, then it could have heavily influenced his development and sense of self from an early age. Due to his mother's rejection, Jerry Brudos attached himself to other women very early on and quickly. In fact, one of his childhood female friends actually died, which could have had a detrimental impact on Jerry's development. Jerry often found himself alone, dreaming up a fantasy life and habits that by the age of 17 actually got him in trouble with the law. His fantasies often involved a sexual fetish for women's clothing, and more in particularly women's shoes. Nobody knows for sure how Jerry Brudos became a foot fetishist. One thing is certain, he he began to manifest the obsession with women's shoes at a very, very young age. When Jerry was just 5 years old, he had come across a pair of women's spike-heeled shoes at a local dump, and curious, he decided to take them home with him. That evening, his mother saw him wearing them in his bedroom and was instantly enraged. She grabbed the shoes from Jerry, destroyed them, and lectured him on how such things are wicked for men to wear. His mother's highly agitated and inexplicably upset state signaled to Jerry as a boy that there was something about those shoes that was so deliciously forbidden. It's speculated that this one instance of putting these shoes off limits pervaded Jerry's developing sexuality, so much so that he had actually stolen his kindergarten teacher's shoes that she kept in her desk and was further punished for. Brudos began to secretly collect shoes which he fetishized. The shoes became sexually arousing for Jerry. He hid his collection of women's shoes from his mother and eventually began collecting women's underwear too. He frequently secretly went into his neighbors' houses and stole their underwear. These women's clothes to Jerry gave him some sense of comfort. They were mysterious and forbidden, which aroused deep erotic feelings in him that he didn't understand or explain. When he was 17 in 1956, his fetishes and sexual desires became dangerous. Jerry actually dug a hole in a hillside near his home, which he planned to use to keep girls as sex slaves. He quickly put his plan into action and took a 17-year-old girl there at knife point and demanded that she take off her clothes so he could take pictures of her nude body. After the nude photo shoots, Jerry beat her up. An elderly couple actually happened upon his hillside hole and caught him.
He quickly admitted what he'd done and was sentenced to 9 months in the psychiatric ward of the Oregon State Hospital, although during that time he still attended school. During his therapy sessions in the ward, doctors quickly became aware that his fetishes and sexual fantasies were centered around his hatred for his demanding mother, and that he even wanted revenge against women in general. The doctors found out about Jerry's collection of women's clothing, and Jerry even told them about one disturbing fantasy he had, which included placing kidnapped girls into his freezer so he could later arrange their stiff bodies into sexually explicit poses. The examining medical staff came to the surprising conclusion that they did not believe Brudos was grossly mentally ill. However, a psychologist a few years ago went through the psychiatric report and concluded that Jerry Brudos was actually a borderline schizophrenic. The doctors later released him, deeming that he had an adjustment reaction to adolescence and was not considered to be dangerous. Jerry was immature and unable to deal normally with his developing and evolving sexuality, but that did not raise concerns in the doctors at the time as the foundation for a violent future. The doctors simply believed that Jerry needed to grow up. And that was all. Now you have to remember that this was 1956, and all too much was known about the development of serial sexual predators, so the doctors can't exactly be blamed for their misjudgments. Soon after, Jerry Brudos enrolled in the military, but was discharged early on account of his sexual obsessions. After that, he became an electronics technician. In 1961, when Jerry was 22, he met a 17-year-old shy girl who had conflicting names from different sources. Some called her Darcy, others Ralphine, and others Susan. Whatever the girl's name, Jerry, and I'm going to call her Darcy for the purpose of this video, quickly got married. In order to please her husband, Darcy complied with whatever Jerry wanted, including staying naked around the house, staying away from his workshop in the garage, and avoiding the attic. Darcy and Jerry eventually had 2 children together, and soon after, Darcy began to refuse to have sex with Jerry any longer. Darcy didn't notice when Jerry would sneak out late at night and break into their neighbours' homes to satisfy his underwear fetish. However, she did begin to notice some changes in his behaviour.
On one occasion, he even walked up to her dressed in women's underwear, which shocked her and upset her as she couldn't seem to understand why he'd dressed like that. On another occasion, Darcy found a paperweight in the house that was shaped like a woman's breast, which deeply disturbed her. Not knowing what to do, she simply accepted it and forgot about the incident. As Jerry grew bolder during his invasion of people's homes for their clothing, he took advantage of his ability to sneak undetected into women's bedrooms and actually overpowered one sleeping woman and proceeded to rape her. The woman reported it to the police, however nobody was able to trace it back to Jerry Brudos. When Jerry was 28, Linda Slauson came to his front door. What happened to Linda would be his first murder, and it was only after he described to the police what he had done to her did they realise the full extent of his sick fantasies. While trying to link the murders to Brudos, the detectives on the case put Jerry Brudos' known activities against the timeline of missing women. It turned out that in January of 1968, Jerry Brudos had lived in the same neighborhood where Linda Slauson would sell her encyclopedias when she went missing. Jerry's next movements were to move to Salem in either August or September of 1968 and started work in Lebanon, Oregon, right by the freeway where Jan Whitney had vanished in November of that same year. His current job was only 6 miles from the river where the bodies of Linda Sarli and Karen Sprinker were found. Karen Sprinker had actually disappeared from an area that was only a few blocks away from where Brudos lived. Before his arrest, the police hadn't sufficient grounds for a search warrant for his house. However, he did let police into his workshop where he appeared to have a vast amount of nylon rope. Police found some rope in his workshop that was actually tied in knots in a similar way to the knots used to bind the bodies to the car parts. Jerry even let police take a sample of the rope and knots. However, right after the police took a sample and left, he rang his attorney, Dale Drake, and asked him to find out why the police were so interested in him. That was when Dale Drake agreed to represent him if he ever should need it. The police managed to get a search warrant for Jerry's car, but immediately discovered that the interior had actually been thoroughly washed. This was very suspicious to the police, however was not concrete evidence of his involvement. The police did, however, find a firearm in his car, which was an offence, as I don't believe he held a license for the gun, and I don't believe it's legal to keep a gun in your car in the state of Oregon in those days. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. However, the 15-year-old girl that he had attempted to kidnap picked him out of a photo spread as the man that had tried to force her into his car, which gave police sufficient cause to arrest him. That along with the weapons charge. After Jerry Brudos was arrested on May 30th, he was actually arrested wearing women's underwear. He agreed to be interrogated, and despite his attorney's warning to not talk to the police, Jerry Brudos offered a confession. Jerry Brudos' confession is truly disturbing, and as he provided more and more details to the police, it became clear that his love and passion and fetish for shoes, panties and bras was very, very extreme. Whenever he would talk about them, he would become extremely excited and happy. This disturbed the officers sitting with him in the room. Between January 1968 to April 1969, Jerry Brudos admitted to killing 4 women. He also admits to attacking and attempting to murder several more. Please keep in mind that what is known about almost all these encounters with the victims comes from Jerry's own confessions, which he freely gave over a period of 3 days. So whatever he is saying, he may be exaggerating truths or saying stuff to almost satisfy his ego. The police quickly noted that during his confessions, he had a complete absence of guilt and remorse, and he never lost his appetite, regardless of how gruesome and grotesque his descriptions were. He only showed a negative emotion once, and that was when he thought about his family and how bad he felt for his wife and kids. That is all. Nothing for any of the victims or their families. Jerry admitted to not only having murdered 4 of the women, but also mutilating them and throwing their bodies into the river after he cut parts from them. His first victim, Linda Slauson, he had cut off her left foot and had kept the foot for a while so he could photograph her severed foot in various different women's shoes. 2 of his other victims, he had cut their breasts from their bodies. He'd also photographed them while they were under his power and proceeded to then have sex with their dead corpses. Linda Slauson unfortunately naively followed him to the workshop around the back of his house to sell her encyclopedias to him, where Jerry hit her with a plank of wood hard enough to completely knock her out. He then strangled her to death. Jerry's entire family, including his mother, lived in the house with him, and while Jerry had the body of a dead girl on the floor of his workshop, they were completely unaware. Jerry continued to have calm conversations with his family and urged them that night to go and get dinner at a fast food restaurant. This is what Jerry told the police originally, but then he decided to tell them everything. Every single detail. Okay, so typically serial killers will often quickly dispose of the body or get away as quickly as they can after their first murder. And then as they begin to murder more and become more desensitized to the corpses, they begin to do more with them. However, Jerry Brudos, right off the bat with his first murder, started thinking about what he could do with her dead body. Now he had the real thing. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. Once Jerry was alone with her corpse, he undressed her. He recalled every single detail of her clothing to the police and was ecstatic to describe that she had been wearing a pair of red underwear. He then went to his own collection of women's clothing and redressed her in them. After a while, he realised that he couldn't keep her body in his garage, so he removed her foot with a hacksaw, stuck the foot in the freezer, and took the body to the river. To be sure the body wasn't found, he tied her to a car engine and threw her over the bridge railing. Afterwards, he went back home and savoured the part of her that he'd kept. It was a trophy to him. Jerry had so many high-heeled shoes that he wanted to try to put on the severed foot, and he did, and he photographed each one to satisfy his fetishes, and he did that for as long as he could. But obviously, the foot being severed, it began to deteriorate, so he tied it to a weight and also threw it into the river. As Jerry told police more, he grew more arrogant as he described his horrific actions. To the police, it was as if he viewed his victims simply as objects that belonged to him, that existed solely for his own sexual pleasures. Whatever future they might have was no concern to him whatsoever. All he cared about was his own fantasies and pleasures, and since dead bodies quickly decompose, he had to constantly find new victims. Police quickly realised that they would probably never find the remains of Linda Slauson this long after her murder, so they started asking about the other missing girls. Firstly, Jan Whitney, who had been missing for 6 months at that point. Just like the police had suspected, the car Jan Whitney had been driving had broken down, and it was just her bad luck that Jerry Brudos was driving by as it happened. Jerry told police that Jan was actually with 2 men who looked to be hippies, but he stopped anyway. For Jerry, it was a game he could not resist to play, and he played it out for maximum enjoyment. Jan had apparently given the 2 hippie men a ride, and unfortunately when they broke down, they had no idea how to fix the car. So Jerry gave them all a ride, dropping the men off at their destination, and then proceeding to take Jan to his home, where he told her that he was going to nip in and tell his wife that he was going back out to fix Jan's car, and Jan complied. Jerry then got back into the car with Jan and told her to close her eyes, which she did, and then he put a strap over her head and around her neck to keep her from moving, and strangled her to death. Once Jan was dead, Jerry had sex with her body in the car, and afterwards he took her into his workshop, dressed in some of his clothes, and took photographs to keep as trophies. He also raped and violated Jan's body several more times. Afterwards, he tied the body up and raised her into the air on a hook that was fixed into the workshop ceiling. Jerry actually left Jan's body dangling there in the garage for several days, despite the fact that someone could easily stumble upon it. Jerry had become cocky already, and was only his second victim. In fact, while Jerry and his family were away on a short vacation, somebody actually crashed their car into his house, leaving a hole big enough for someone to peer in and see Jan's body hanging from the ceiling. Yet nobody looked. Not even the police, who came to investigate the scene of the crash. Brudos told detectives that the incident nearly lost him the game, and they were very, very close. Afterwards, he quickly removed the body, which stank of decomposition, and invited the police to come inspect the damage to the building. Even with all the decomposition, the police smelt nothing. The corpse was wrapped in a plastic sheet only a short distance away in a building in his yard. Unlike with his last victim, Jerry decided to keep her right breast instead of taking a foot. He told police that he took the breast so he can make a plastic mold out of it, which he would then use to make paperweights, but he did it wrong, and it didn't turn out the way he wanted to. He'd actually tried to make molds out of future victims' breasts. However, he would fail every time. Just like with Linda Slauson, he tied Jan Whitney's body to a heavy car part and threw it into the river. He downright refused to give police a specific location. Police noted that he was still holding back key details, as if he thought that keeping certain things secret would prevent them from prosecuting him. Jerry then began to talk about his next victim, Karen Sprinker, who he encountered at the department store where she'd gone to meet her mother. He had actually tried to kidnap another girl but missed his opportunity, so settled on Karen. Although he told police Jerry didn't like the shoes she was wearing. He used his pistol to get her into his car, and he drove her straight back to his house, where he raped her and forced her to pose in the clothing of his choice. Afterwards, he then killed her by hanging her by the neck from the hook he'd dangled Jan's body from. He then did the same to her corpse as he did the others. However, this time, he removed both breasts and dressed her in a long line bra that was far too large for her. He stuffed it with brown paper to keep her from bleeding in his car and to make the bra look correct. He then threw her body into the river, bound to a car part, just like the others. His next victim, Linda Sarli, he'd used a fake police badge and accused her of shoplifting to get her into his car. He tied her up in his workshop and left her there while he went and ate the dinner that his wife had prepared for him. She apparently didn't attempt to escape. Jerry then raped her as he strangled her to death. Afterwards, he stuck wires into her ribcage to try to make her dance, with electrical current. It apparently didn't work to his liking. On June 2nd, 1969, Jerry Brudos was charged with a first-degree murder in the death of Karen Sprinker, and the police obtained a search warrant for his property. Jerry had actually instructed his wife to burn his entire collection of female clothing. However, his wife Darcy didn't comply, and police found all the evidence they needed. Upon entering Jerry Brudos' house, the search team was instantly shocked by what they found. They took photographs of everything, including the hook in the ceiling that he used to hoist his victims' corpses into the air. On one of the shelves, they found a mold made for the paperweight that Brudos had previously described. They found nylon cord and a leather strap that looked to have been used in the murders. They also discovered a massive stash of women's shoes in various different sizes, and many styles of underwear, bras, girdles, panties, and slips. Then they found Jerry's extensive photograph collection. Some of the photos were of Jerry in female underwear, but the most important photographs were the horrific and terrifying images of his victims. One of the photographs portrayed a woman suspended from the hook in the ceiling with a black hood over her head. Another showed a body dressed up in several different garments. In most of the photographs, the framing had been cropped so there were no heads in the picture, so that he could enjoy the anonymous female form. Most importantly, the police found a photograph that showed a girl's body clothed in a black lace slip and panties with garters, hung suspended from the ceiling. The camera angled up to her crotch, and reflected in a mirror on the floor in the lower corner of the photo was an image of the killer, caught completely unaware. The man in the image, Jerry Brudos, looking at the woman he had just murdered in cold blood. Police now had enough physical evidence against Jerry Brudos. They had also confirmed with the survivor the details of a rape that Jerry had admitted to. However, the woman had been unable to identify her attacker. What happened to Linda Slauson and Jan Whitney's bodies is disputed. Some sources say that the bodies were never found, while others say that Jan Whitney's body was recovered in the summer of 1970. Whatever the case, the police had enough evidence to take Jerry Brudos to trial. On June 4th, 1969, Jerome Brudos was brought in front of the court. Brudos kept Dale Drake to defend him, who teamed up with a high-powered criminal lawyer called George Roten. The entire courtroom expected the trial to be very long and tedious and very graphic. The prosecution had an extensive witness list and a massive collection of evidence against Jerry Brudos. Jerry's defense attorneys knew there was no chance in hell they'd be able to argue against Jerry's guilt, so they decided on a strategy that oriented around mental illness. Jerry Brudos pleaded not guilty, and against the advisement of his attorneys, because he actually thought himself to be a genius, not guilty by reason of insanity. That meant that he'd have to go through extensive mental health assessments from both sides, and he did. He tried to convince medical professionals that he was himself a victim of his terrible mother by crying and whining. However, they noted that he just seemed to feel sorry for himself. Jerry told the doctors that in 1967 he'd had a terrible accident while repairing a device with a live wire, which had knocked him from his feet. He claimed to have survived, but suffered terrible, severe headaches afterwards. It was only then that he began knocking women down to steal their clothing and raping women in their own home. He claimed that in those situations, he was simply completely unable to control himself. He said that he began to fantasize about keeping female corpses in his freezer, and that he wanted to be able to dress them and pose them. In his words, he wanted a life-sized doll. After murdering his first victim, Jerry bought a large chest freezer. He had now begun his fantasy, and he wanted to be ready for the next victim. Jerry was a man that liked to be in control. He even insisted that if he were treated in a hospital, that he would get better so he could get out and raise his children. He was so oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, but he was not confused. He was completely arrogant and had no sense of remorse at all. Several medical professionals assessed him and indicated that while he had a personality disorder, he definitely knew that what he was doing was wrong, and he knew he was doing it, which meant he would not be considered legally insane. Was he a danger to society? 100%. Was he able to be rehabilitated? Not a chance. After a consultation with his attorneys, Jerry Brudos changed his plea to guilty of the murder of Jan Whitney, Karen Sprinker, and Linda Sarli. He was subsequently sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, however with the chance for parole. He also admitted to the murder of Linda Slauson, but because he wouldn't give up the location of her body, and because her body was never found, he was not prosecuted in this case. That's when Jerry Brudos' wife was also arrested and tried as an accomplice to murder. The police had a witness, their neighbour, who claims to have seen Darcy help Jerry move a victim. However, her testimony was quickly discredited, and since there was no more evidence that Darcy knew about or participated in any of the murders, she was acquitted. In 1970, she divorced Jerry Brudos and changed her name. She then moved with her kids to an unknown location and tried to put the entire thing behind her. You have to remember, Darcy discovered his cross-dressing habits and the paperweight he had attempted to make. In my eyes, Darcy was a victim of these crimes too. In August of 1970, Jerry attempted to appeal his sentence, arguing that he should have been serving 3 life sentences concurrently and not consecutively, as he had been tried for the same offence. However, the court denied his appeal. He made many appeals after that, which were also denied, including one where he'd claimed he'd suffered from hypoglycemia when offering his guilty plea. In later appeals, he insists he is no longer a threat to society, or claims that he didn't even commit the murders in the first place. He also tried to explain away his crimes by blaming his mother's abuse and neglect. In 1995, however, the parole board voted to keep him in prison for life. He still comes up to appeal every 2 years. In 2003, they denied his appeal for freedom after just a half-hour interview. In 2005, he came up for parole again, which was swiftly denied. On March 28, 2006, at the age of 67, Jerome Brudos died from natural causes. He was the longest incarcerated inmate, almost 37 years, at Oregon State Penitentiary. The body of Linda Slauson has still not been recovered to this day. Thank you so much for watching this episode in my Curious Case True Crime series. Let me know in the comments what you think of this case. This case really is a horrifying one. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it interesting, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I upload a new Curious Case video every Sunday at 8 PM UK time, 2 PM Chicago time, midday LA. There are links to my previous episodes in the description box below. If you have any case suggestions, feel free to leave them down below, and I'll see you in the next case.